Well, hello everybody, LA Little here, and this is today's Neo-TA Wrap. We take a look at these markets, we do it from a neoclassical perspective. And what does that mean? That means we look at these markets, we ask ourselves one question: what happened today? What does it tell us about the coming days? Do a show 4 times a week, Monday through Thursday, broadcast at or before 10 o'clock Eastern Time, archived on YouTube. It's under the channel LA Little. Subscribe to it, content's pushed, you'll be notified. As far as what did happen today, you know, these markets don't want to go down, folks. They want to go up. They were down early, quite a bit more than this. They end up almost flat, a little bit down, but they do want to rise. We'll look at that here in a bit. If you look elsewhere, most of the action today was not in the indexes, certainly not domestically, not in Europe. Although it was in Asia, we'll look at that next, and then we'll rotate over to what was interesting today, which was currencies, the metals, a few of those things, which I don't cover that much, but tonight we'll do that. So let's take a look at the boards here, and let's pop up Asia. Not the Hang Seng, but the Shanghai. What happened in Shanghai last night is something to talk about. Not that it was a major event, but it was an event worth speaking to. And what I'm talking about was the reversal last night off of what has been just I'm going up market. Volume expands. Let's see here. We got 2.8, and this other high back here was the highest one so far is 3.4. We have one more day, 2.8. If I divide that by 4, what does that give me? 7. 7 plus 2, 8, 3.5, and this was what? 3.4. So you can see here the volume this week is going to be as much as it has been throughout this entire rally. Why is that significant? Because when you put in a range top, that usually comes on some sort of expansion of volume. Didn't happen here. We got some sort of a small consolidation afterwards, but now it looks like we got a top, and we're probably going to have volume on it. And that is something new and different. And it's significant in the sense that if in fact that is what happens, then we're going to have ourselves a range. And so we can start to think about, okay, what might that range look like? Well, the first obvious range would be in this area, and it would be 2 ranges inside of it, right? Something, let me try to finish that up and then delete that one. Something like this maybe. And that, if that takes place, right, then that would say, okay, you've got 2 ranges, and in this case, if it puts in that range, it's going to have left volume at the top and probably finish inside the lower range. That means it can make it all the way to the bottom. Now that's the way, you know, this has started to set up. Of course, tonight we'll tell the tape. We'll see what it does. We'll get some sort of sense of what it's doing. But you're coming back into this previous little high here, 45.70, and it is trading at 46.20. So not that far away, 50 points. What we want to see is, what does it do tonight? Does it hang up here or not? I got a sneaky feeling it will, and that the range will probably develop next week if in fact it's going to. If we look at the daily chart, you can see the damage down 6.5%. Volume expands, and on a daily, volume almost eclipsed what you had in that big drop once before. That was 857. You did 782. So not quite as much, but you can see a lot of damage, a lot of volume escalation. What are they doing? They're shaking out the traders that are in there, and you know, when you get this kind of rally, you're going to get some big swings, and now you're starting to see some of those big swings. Is this something to worry about? You know, it depends on what you're trying to do, right? But if you're trying to trade this for a longer term trade, this thing's coming back in to do a retest, regenerate off the previous high. It's going to do it within 6 bars if it hits tonight. 45.70, we traded down to 46.16. So you'd have to do another 40 points to get into that. And that breakout, you got 1, 2, 3, 4. If you're a bull, you would really like to see this hold get a little bit more of a bounce maybe Monday, and then come back in there, because that gives you the best opportunity from a probability standpoint of holding that bar. Just looking at that bar, it looks like as long as you don't blow it out tonight, which I doubt it will, you probably will be able to hold it anyway. But that's China. And the reason China is important is because when you have one of these kinds of markets, constantly escalating higher and higher, all eyes turn to it, and then all of a sudden when it starts making these big moves down, then everybody starts worrying about crash, and of course it bleeds over in other markets and so forth. So, is it something to worry about in my mind? Probably not. Is it something that is valuable to stay aware of? Yeah, sure it is. I mean, you got to. You have to, because it's going to bleed over in other markets just like it is here with the Hang Seng. So if I take this back off, if we're looking at the Hang Seng, now remember on the Hang Seng, we were waiting for or expecting it to get back into this bar. And the reason for that is the Hang Seng was kind of divided into two quadrants as well. You kind of had that one and the one below it. And that led us to believe that it would probably get back into the swing point low, right, and test into it. Well, till last night, of course, off China, this thing comes barreling back down, and it's going to try to get back into that. Whether it does it immediately, gets a bounce, then does it, it just looks like that's where it's trying to get to. That's where all the volume is. That's where the breakout, the gap up breakout was. That just seems like the logical place to expect this thing to come back to at some point, and it looks like maybe now is the time. If we look at the rest of Asia, the only other one that's really doing anything is the Nikkei. Nikkei put in volume last night with a doji after an extended run. This also looks like it potentially is going to set up some sort of a high, at least on the short-term time frame, for a range trade as well. So let's pop back over to our markets now that we've looked at those. And what do we have over here? Well, a whole lot of nothing really. Because if we look over here and pull up the S&P 500, it's an inside day, volume tails off. This is, it doesn't really tell me anything. The only thing it tells me tonight is you got a long tail. Now, a long tail after a takeaway bar typically says you're probably going to try to head back up. So that's about the most I can glean from that. If I look at the S&P, the NASDAQ, not as long a tail, but it held well. Does a doji that still wants to go test that high volume top on a weekly basis. If I look at the NDX, it's the same thing. A little doji inside bar still wants to test the top. And the Russell, this morning the Russell was heading down, and then it leaves a long tail as well. That also suggests that this one's going to try to push back up. So when I look at our indexes, it's just the long tails telling me that there's the potential, or a greater potential, I should say, that we get some sort of continuation bounce come tomorrow. Sector-wise, nothing there, and nothing on these others. So when I come back, I want to look at gold. I want to look at the dollar. I want to look at some of those OX markets, because that is where the action was and will be probably tomorrow. I'll be right back.
If you are serious about trading, TA Today's Tools is the perfect service to help you reach your trading goals. Go to our homepage and click Use Our Tools. Here you will find an overview of this amazing service we offer to our clients. One of the tools you will have access to is the TA Today charts. These charts visually map all the neoclassical concepts that LA writes and teaches about, and is the perfect charting service for neoclassical traders. Learn the trend of a stock you're interested in, and see this stock on all 3 time frames. To get started with a free 2-week trial, go to our homepage, click Use Our Tools, and then click the free trial button.
Okay, as we come back here, we're just going to start with the dollar. We're going to start with the currencies, and then move our way around to bonds, to oil, to the dollar, to the gold, silver, that. So let's take the dollar first. Okay, so last night we were talking about the dollar had failed, right? Looked like it was ready to start trying to pull back. That's what it tried to do today. Now, the dollar, if you remember now, the dollar has put itself in a situation to where it is probably a range trade. So when I pull this over, right, we got over it on this bar, we got it over on the second bar, so we had 2 bars, we stayed over it. It tells me that more than likely that we're no longer doing this, that instead we're doing something like that. So that is a good thing to know, right? And then the next question is, when you get something like that, what does it mean in terms of what happens next? Well, that depends on your time frame, of course, but I'm going to use the weekly because it's easier to show it. So the weekly, we kind of overextended to the downside. Now we're getting a bounce. Now that bounce, as it bounces, it can do one of 2 things, right? It can actually come down and regenerate lower, but we just said that more than likely it's a range trade. If that's the case, then we shouldn't expect that to happen, but instead we should probably expect some sort of an attempt, at least, to do some sort of an ABCD to the top side. If that's true, then you would expect something like this. So that's kind of the 2 sides to this thing. Let's go back now to the daily chart. And if I do that, then what I'm going to see here is, if now we think about that ABCD structure, we had a little ABCD structure that went up and completed on the way up. So now, as it comes back down, typically what you're going to look for is some area of significance. So you had a test here and a high volume high there. That was where you got the little pullback and then the thrust forward. I would expect that would be the area that one should consider a good possibility of getting back to. So if it comes back to that deep, then there wouldn't be much of an ABCD structure on this time frame. It would be on the weekly that you would get the structure. Now if it comes back not as much, right? So if the dollar only comes back, say maybe to the lows here, right, which is that support zone you see in green, then you could actually get a decent structure here to push this thing higher. So in the short term, there's some sort of retrace taking place. That retrace is going to allow some of these other markets to do their thing. And before I turn to those, let's first go and look at the euro and the yen, which is the biggest piece. Actually, let's start with the British currency. So Britain's coming back down. That one's actually going to turn. That will put pressure back on the dollar. If we look at Canada, which is also, these are the smaller players, that one's already turning, going to put pressure on the dollar. So the smaller players are going to put pressure on the dollar. If I look at, to come down, right? If I look at the euro, it's doing the same thing. Remember last night we said it had failed and was going to bounce. And it had the best setup because it got under, back over after an extended move. So that's a 2 bar, and it had tested into this big bar. And so when I look at that, this one's going to bounce back up. Where can it bounce to? Well, look no farther than this big volume bar here. That low is 108.63. So I would think you get at least into that bar, maybe up to the top of that bar, somewhere in that area. That's where you should think it's going to try to get to. And finally, if we look at Japan, even Japan, which has just blasted their currency lower, they got an under over, but they had more volume. But we should get some sort of a little bounce out of this one as well. So I would expect we'll see some sort of a bounce. I don't think Japan, given the way the yen traded down here, I don't think it's going to get back up here. More than likely you're going to get into this area here at best, and then consider another move to the downside. And that's a fairly significant ABCD structure. Matter of fact, if you take the one that was already there, right, you had this one, pulls into here, gets a little bounce, and then you can see how far it overextended. So I would expect a push back up into here, maybe a little higher. And then at that point, right, you'd have another ABCD structure starting to take place. And so that's kind of how the yen is settling. If the yen is going down, then the dollar is going up. So the yen's going to continue over time to put pressure on the dollar. That's the second largest weighting. The big weighting, of course, is not the yen, it's the euro. And that the real question here is going to be, will the euro fell on a bounce and actually start coming back down. And what I'm talking about is if I go to the weekly, right, the weekly is set up to do a range. It looks to me like that range is still in its, I wouldn't say infancy, but maybe, a quarter, half, maybe 3/4 of the way through. It's been doing this now for, I would take it back to this bar. So it's been doing it for about 5 months. If this goes on for another 2 or 3 months and then starts to dive again, that would be a decent consolidation period for it. Notice it also, we didn't talk about this before, but it came into this 107.73. That was where all the volume was. That's where it's bouncing out of, and it looks like it will hold it because I don't think it's going to get that much strength tomorrow, if any. If that's true, then you're going to actually hold, and that would give you a decent little bounce up. Now, it is possible that the euro could trade, all the way back up on an ABCD structure here. It's a little early to, speculate on that, but that's possible as well. Because remember, the euro came from like 134, the big break in the euro, and we'd have to look at the monthly on it, but that would be about where this goes to, right? About 119. Let me pull the monthly over and I'll show you what I'm talking about. So if I pull the monthly in here, here's the big breaks on the monthly. 118.79, and this one was 119.73. So like 118.80 to about 119.70 is that zone that you see there. That was the breakdown bar. It's probably going to be more than 6 bars before it gets back up there, if it gets back up there. But note that that would be where the ABCD structure would take it on the other side. Now, if that happens and it gets that much strength, that's going to push the dollar even lower, right? And that in itself is going to put some juice under some of these things we're about to look at, which is gold and silver and so forth. So let's look at these. Now, gold today did an under-over. Gold got underneath this bar, got back over, it had less volume. Now, it wasn't the prior bar, so it's a little less important to me. But what's really important is that it has held now, and I want to point this out because this is really what the story was. It's held on this bar now, right? It's held that bottom on 3 different attempts to break it down. That says this thing's going to try to bounce. Where's it going to bounce to? Well, it's going to bounce right into that bar to start with, but I don't think that's going to stop it. I think what it wants to do is come all the way back up to here and go back in and test this one. So gold looks like it's fixing to go into and try to close the gap and press this back to the upside. If I look at silver, silver not quite as clean a setup. It had more volume today. It had less volume today, but a little bit more than yesterday. Did not get back into the big volume bar, but again, it's got that big bar sitting out here. It looks like that's where it wants to go, and it almost got into the high volume bar here. That price point was 1576. You got the 1582 and had no volume. This also leaves a little bit of a tail hammer. That one wants to go higher as well. And then finally going to the oil market. If I look at oil, oil also is going to try to bounce. Why do I say that? Well, because if I go back over here and I look at this, right, that's where the support is. So we could get a little bit more pressure, but I suspect it's going to hold this area and get a bounce back up. Where to? I suspect that's the bar it's playing with now. So it's this bar it's playing with. That's where all your volume is on this time frame. That's where it's going to play, consolidate before it probably heads lower, in my opinion. But we'll have to wait and see how it consolidates and what the volumes look like. So that's the oil, the silver, the gold. Finally, let's look at the bonds, right? The bonds got to push up off the lows. They go an over under today. They actually had a little less volume. So that's a failure, right? And looks to me like that will try to come back a little bit. Where's the price points to look at on the way back? 120.63, and then these 2 bars down here at 120.72. So when I look at 121.65 was that number up there. So when I look at this, I want to see some sort of a fade back in, absolutely no volume, to set up what? Set up another ABCD structure to take this back higher. A lot of people believe, and I'll just take it to the deep one here and show that ABCD. A lot of people believe that the bond rally is over. I think it's a little premature to think that. I know that everybody believes that because they think the Fed's going to move. I don't know if the Fed's going to move or not. I don't know if the Fed will be able to move. If the dollar's too strong, they're going to have a very hard time doing it. And maybe they'll get in that one rate cut that Yellen really wants to get in, and then that dollar gets croaked after that. I'm not sure how this is going to play out. Or maybe the dollar soars as a result of it, and that's where the euro finally croaks and heads back the other way. It's a little too early to know that, but when I look at bonds, I don't think bonds are quite done. And I say that because here, let me pull over a monthly and I'll show you what I'm talking about. On a monthly time frame, bonds came in, well, first of all, let's step back quite a bit here. And I'm on a monthly now, so we're back in 2011. 2011, you had a big push higher. This was off of weakness in the market. That spike up eventually got a spike back down and then tried to do an ABCD structure. The top side didn't have the volume in it, and it actually fails and comes back, right? And where does it come back to? Well, it comes back almost, right? Almost to the breakout bar, the big bar. So I got deep into that. And then it takes off again, right? And then you spike up here and leave a high. No big volume on the high. Usually you're going to get some volume up there escalating, but it didn't. My suspicion is you're going to see this one more time try to come back up and test into these two bars towards the top. And then that's going to be the key as to whether this rally really is over or not. You got a doji. You're working on a doji for the monthly. I don't think it's going to get back into this big wide price spread bar, but it's a positive bar after a pullback. So when you look at it on the monthly, this is a small pullback compared to the run you just had. So don't write off the bonds yet. I think it's a little bit too early to do that. And if you think about, the potential for one rate hike coming into this market, and then people, fearful of more rate hikes potentially coming after it, or that rate hike really stirring up the currencies and causing the dollar to soar, which could push the markets down, not because of fear of rate hikes, but of fear of the dollar killing all the profits, because we've already been told how much that's a problem. Maybe that's what pushes the market down and pushes these bonds back up to test those highs. I don't think it's done here yet. Okay, that's it for tonight. Thanks for joining. As always, I thank you. Tell a friend, tell two. I'm LA. This is and was your daily NeoTA wrap, and that's it for the week. I will catch up with you on Sunday for the weekly show. Take care. Have a great day tomorrow, and I'll see you then. Good night.